Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today in this video, we're going to look at 4 different orchids in my collections that continue to bloom from existing spikes, even though they're not sequential bloomer, because I kept their spikes and somehow after they opened up all their buds, they continue to grow more and more buds. I know I've talked about these orchids before, but with clear timestamps, hopefully this will give you a new perspective on how well they did for their second bloom in a given blooming cycle. So this one is my That Twinkle. This one is end of March 2019. It opened up all the buds, but then it continued to grow that one extra at the end, and it's until around early May 2019 that it started to open this very last bud. So here, chocolate drops, right? The name is That Twinkle chocolate drops, but the parentage is below at the bottom of the video, and it has Schilleriana, and maybe that's why this orchid is fragrant. But here's the funny thing about this orchid. Last year when I bought it from the store, it was full of bloom but no fragrance whatsoever. So at that time I was saying to myself, gosh, I got a defected That Twinkle. Or maybe it wasn't even That Twinkle at all. It just looked like it's That Twinkle because everyone else's has fragrance except mine. But this year, it has fragrance and it is so perfumey, and I really enjoyed its fragrance a lot. So it was not a mistake. It just simply didn't have any fragrance last year, and my only explanation would be that this plant is simply more matured, so the fragrance this year finally came out. Last year, I don't know why, but all of the care and also the location, ventilation, fertilizer, everything was the same. Ever since I bought it from the store, I kept it the same. So I think the only thing is really age. So the last bud remained at the end of May 2019, and it continued to stay on and stay in bloom for I think another month or so, and it finally dropped around end of June 2019, I think. So overall, this orchid gave me a pretty good 2 to 3 months bloom. I mean, I get it, it's not the full bloom kind of display, but when an orchid that has fragrance, even if it's one flower, you can enjoy that flower every single day. And now this is my golden leopard. Also at the end of March, it opened all the buds already, but very quickly, beginning of April 2019, it started to grow a small bud at the end of its flower spike. And then pretty soon came end of April 2019 was when that bud finally opened. But I don't have any photos of when or record of when this flower finally dropped, because I might have just gotten too busy to take any photos of that particular bloom. Here we have a mini mark. Beginning of April, continued to grow, and then it took it a month or so to open up this flower. So this is the mini mark out of the 5 that gave me the very last bloom into I think end of May. And then I had another mini mark that also did the same thing, and it was also beginning of April that it started to finally want to put out another bud. So that one also continued to bloom, but I also don't have any more documentation on this particular bloom, unfortunately. And here is the last orchid that I want to talk to you about. And so end of March 2019, it had already opened all its flowers, just like all other ones. But then at the end of April, there were many signs of new buds continuing to show up. I was pleasantly surprised. And then it, even well into beginning of May, the first half of May, it was still growing, maturing its buds. And earlier I showed the parentage. So if you're watching this video, whoever that typed the comment and gave me the parentage of this orchid, I thank you. Because for the longest time, I just kept referring to this one as a Trader Joe grocery store fowl or no ID, because I actually didn't know the name of it, but now I do. So thank you. This one doesn't have any fragrance, but the color and the way that all the purple is in the center really gives this orchid a special character. And the fact that it gave me 5 secondary spikes from its existing older spikes. That was something that has never happened to me before. So it was a very, very interesting thing to see an orchid that can put out that many secondary spikes at the same time. So this orchid overall also received just quarter strength fertilizer, and I haven't repotted this orchid yet. So the media is a mixture of bark chips and sphagnum moss, and I usually provide it with a wet-dry cycle around 7 days a cycle, and it seems to be doing very, very well. I did trim its older spikes when it finished bloomed last bloom cycle, and then I kept the original spikes because they remain green. And sure enough, when time was right, it started to pull out secondary spikes. So this kind of, brings us to the discussion about whether you should keep your orchid spikes. And my answer for my orchid definitely is a big yes. I only cut the spikes off if they are yellow or dry. If they are still in its original green color or original color and it's plump, I don't even bother with it. Unless there is an exception. I have a really, really big fowl that keeps its spike, but then I know it's not a sequential bloomer, so I actually cut this portion of the green spike just above the last node, because I want to keep the portion that's green with nodes because it may potentially give me secondary spikes. So for non-sequential bloomers, it could potentially give you secondary spikes. But if you decide to keep the entire spike, it may produce more buds at the end, just like these orchids do or did. But it's not always the case. But secondary spike definitely possible. But if you're dealing with a sequential bloomer, definitely don't cut its spikes. Because, for example, the ever famous Tetraspis C1, it's a sequential bloomer. and it's free blooming throughout the year if you give it the right care. So definitely don't cut off the spike when they're green. So this orchid finally dropped its very last bloom in July, beginning of July. So from March to July, I think it was in bloom for a good 3.5 months. So I'm really happy, really pleased with this orchid. So there you have it. This is my opinion about how you should handle your spikes if they're green or yellow or dead. But for sequential bloomers, definitely keep it when your spikes are green. And for non-sequential bloomers, if you want secondary spikes, if you hope for secondary spikes, keep the spike at least for the portion that has nodes. So anyway, hopefully these timestamps and how these orchids performed this year gave you some perspective or some thinking about how you handle your spike if you're not already doing what I do. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!